The launch was meant to send a message. Solid-fueled Fateh missiles rising in unison. Precision-guided. Road mobile. It's unstoppable. Iran's doctrine was clear. Overwhelm regional defenses with short to medium-range ballistic missiles, saturate airspace, compress reaction time, and force political hesitation before any counterstrike could organize. On paper, the geometry favors the attacker. A ballistic missile climbs steep, exits the dense lower atmosphere, then arcs downward at hypersonic speed. From boost to terminal dive, the entire engagement window can be measured in minutes. Detection. Track. Discriminate. Decide. Launch. Intercept. Every second matters. But here is the problem no one in the press conferences discusses. Once a missile leaves the atmosphere, it stops being a projectile and becomes a math problem. And math does not negotiate. Somewhere in the Pacific, aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer equipped with Aegis ballistic missile defense, another system was waiting. Not louder. Not theatrical. Just precise. The SM-3 Block IIA. Designed not to chase missiles in the atmosphere. Designed to erase them in space. If the Fateh was meant to demonstrate dominance, what happens when it never reaches the descent phase at all? We'll come back to that geometry. Because this is not a story about bravado. It is about intercept physics. Iran's missile doctrine is not irrational. It is structured. Without a modern air force capable of penetrating defended airspace against fifth-generation fighters, Tehran invested in ballistic missiles as strategic equalizers. Mobility replaces air superiority. Volume replaces stealth. Time to impact replaces dogfights. The Fateh family, particularly variants like Fateh 110 and its extended-range derivatives, represent the core of this doctrine. Solid fuel means rapid launch readiness. Road mobility complicates preemptive targeting. Circular error probable measured in tens of meters gives them credible precision against regional bases. Geography amplifies this threat. From western Iran, ballistic trajectories can reach critical nodes across the Gulf within minutes. From southern launch sites, naval assets in constrained waterways fall within range envelopes that compress warning times dramatically. The ballistic arc creates two advantages for the attacker. First, speed. Mid-course velocities exceed Mach 10 outside the atmosphere. Second, altitude. Once in space, the missile coasts beyond reach of most traditional air defense systems. Legacy systems like Patriot were built for terminal defense, intercepting descending targets inside the atmosphere. That means waiting until the warhead is already inbound. Shorter reaction window. Higher closing speed. Greater debris risk over defended territory. Iran's strategic calculation assumes something simple. If enough missiles are launched simultaneously, even advanced defenses will leak. Numbers overwhelm. That assumption has worked historically against many regional systems. But the United States does not rely on terminal defense alone. It built a layered architecture. Aegis at sea. And spy radar tracking hundreds of objects simultaneously. Exoatmospheric interceptors designed to collide in space, not explode near cities. And here is the critical shift. When interception happens in the vacuum of space, debris does not rain over defended territory. It disperses harmlessly. Which means engagement can occur earlier. Far earlier. That changes the timeline. It changes the geometry. And it changes who actually controls the engagement window. Because once the mid-course phase is contested, the ballistic advantage begins to collapse. The question is not whether Fateh missiles can launch. They can. The question is whether they can complete the arc. Iran's missile strategy is built on compression. Compressed detection time. Compressed decision time. Compressed political reaction time. The Fateh series uses solid propellant. No lengthy fueling process. Launch preparation can occur in minutes. Road mobile transporter erector launchers complicate pre-strike targeting. Dispersed batteries create survivability. From ignition to burnout, the boost phase is short and violent. Once the motor burns out, the missile coasts on a predictable ballistic arc. Predictable, but fast. At peak altitude, the warhead travels outside the atmosphere at several kilometers per second. Terminal descent begins with extreme kinetic energy. Even without a large payload, the velocity alone produces destructive force. The geometry appears to favor the attacker for three reasons. First, altitude. Traditional air defense systems must wait for re-entry. Second, speed. Terminal engagement windows shrink to seconds. Third, saturation. If multiple Fateh missiles are launched simultaneously, defenders must allocate interceptors rapidly. Every shot costs money. Every miss carries consequence. Cost asymmetry appears dangerous. A Fateh missile costs in the low millions per unit depending on configuration. Advanced interceptors can exceed that figure. On a spreadsheet, volume seems to win. And here is where most surface-level analysis stops. They assume that interception must occur during terminal descent. They assume debris will fall over defended territory. They assume reaction time is fixed. But those assumptions only apply if interception happens inside the atmosphere. Once interception moves to space, the equation shifts. Before revealing how that shift happens, consider this. If you were designing the defense against a mid-range ballistic threat, would you wait for it to descend, or remove it before gravity accelerates it toward its target? Make the call based on physics, not headlines. Because the system designed for that decision was not built to chase missiles. It was built to meet them head-on in vacuum. That distinction changes everything. The SM-3 Block IIA was not designed as a traditional missile. It was designed as a collision system. Co-developed by the United States and Japan, the Block IIA variant represents a leap in both diameter and velocity over earlier SM-3 versions. A 21-inch booster stack gives it more energy, more altitude, more reach. But the innovation is not in the rocket motor alone. It is in the kill vehicle. Instead of carrying an explosive warhead, the SM-3 uses a kinetic warhead, officially called the lightweight exoatmospheric projectile. There is no blast fragmentation, no proximity detonation. It destroys through pure kinetic energy. It to kill. In space, closing velocities between interceptor and target can exceed 10 kilometers per second combined. At that speed, the energy of impact is catastrophic. The math is simple. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Velocity squared. Double the velocity, quadruple the energy. Even without explosives, the collision is equivalent to a massive high-speed impact that vaporizes the target. But hitting a ballistic missile in space is not intuitive. There is no air, no lift, no aerodynamic correction. Course corrections rely entirely on divert thrusters, small rocket jets that allow the kill vehicle to adjust trajectory in microseconds. This is guidance under vacuum. The interceptor separates from its booster outside the atmosphere. The kill vehicle activates its infrared seeker, searching for the heat signature of the warhead against the cold background of space. This is where sensor logic becomes decisive. The AN/SPY radar aboard Aegis ships tracks the ballistic object during boost and midcourse. It calculates trajectory solutions in real time. That data is fed into the interceptor before launch and updated mid-flight via uplink. Fire control is networked. The ship does not operate alone. It is part of an integrated ballistic missile defense architecture, including space-based early warning satellites and forward-deployed radar systems. Layered detection compresses uncertainty. By the time the SM-3 leaves the launch cell, it already knows where the target will be. Not where it is, where it will be. That predictive intercept geometry is the advantage. And this is critical. Engaging during midcourse means interception occurs outside the atmosphere. No urban debris risk. No last-second scramble. The defender regains time. And when time returns to the defender, volume becomes manageable. This is not a single ship gambling on one shot. It is a layered system that can allocate multiple interceptors per target if necessary. Numbers still matter. But now they matter differently. Because once midcourse interception becomes reliable, saturation must overcome not just one ship, but an entire network. And that network does not blink. When the Fateh missile clears the atmosphere, it enters what Iranian planners consider sanctuary. Midcourse. No air resistance. No aerodynamic instability. Pure ballistic glide under Newtonian mechanics. But sanctuary only exists if no one is waiting above the atmosphere. The SM-3 Block IIA does not chase the missile downward. It climbs higher. Burnout velocity exceeds 4.5 kilometers per second. That energy allows the interceptor to reach well beyond 1,000 kilometers in range and engage at altitudes exceeding 1,000 kilometers depending on trajectory. This is not air defense. This is orbital geometry. The AN/SPY-1 or SPY-6 radar aboard Aegis ships tracks the ascending Fateh during boost and early midcourse. Radar cross-section of a ballistic body in space is not trivial. There are no terrain returns. No ground clutter. A single object against black sky. Discrimination matters. The system must determine whether it is tracking a warhead, debris, or decoy. The SPY radar feeds refined track data into the Aegis combat system. Fire control calculates intercept vectors. The missile leaves its vertical launch cell within seconds. The booster stages burn sequentially, each stage adding velocity, extending the intercept basket. At third stage burnout, the kill vehicle separates. Now the engagement becomes surgical. The lightweight exo-atmospheric projectile activates its infrared seeker. It does not look for radar return. It looks for thermal contrast, the slight residual heat signature of the warhead against the cold of space. There is no explosive blast radius to compensate for error. Hit to kill demands centimeter-level accuracy. Divert thrusters pulse. Micro-adjustments in vacuum. Corrections measured in milliseconds. Closing speed approaches 10 km per second combined. At that velocity, the kinetic energy released on impact equals several tons of TNT, without explosives. The collision is instantaneous. The warhead disintegrates. Not damaged. Erased. The debris cloud disperses in space. Gravity does the rest. Now the cost discussion changes. A Fateh missile costs millions. An SM-3 Block IIA interceptor is expensive, tens of millions. On the surface that seems asymmetric. But this is not missile versus missile economics. This is warhead versus defended infrastructure. One Fateh striking a hardened base, port facility, or allied capital can cause strategic damage disproportionate to its cost. Preventing that impact preserves infrastructure worth billions. Cost per kill must be measured against strategic value, not procurement price. And layered defense changes saturation math. Aegis ships do not operate independently. They network with forward-based radar, allied ships, and land-based interceptors. Multiple engagement opportunities exist. Boost tracking, mid-course intercept, terminal fallback. This is where critics raise a valid question. What about maneuvering re-entry vehicles? What about decoys? What about electronic warfare targeting radar? Those are real concerns. Ballistic missile defense is not invulnerable. Decoys can complicate discrimination. Advanced maneuvering warheads can alter descent profile. Electronic attack could attempt to degrade radar picture. This is not a video game. But doctrine mitigates. First, mid-course intercept occurs before terminal maneuvering becomes effective. The warhead must separate and descend to maneuver. Destroying it earlier denies that advantage. Second, multi-sensor fusion. Space-based infrared systems detect launch. X-band radar refines discrimination. Shipboard radar tracks continuously. Data fusion reduces decoy confusion. Third, shot doctrine. The U.S. Navy does not rely on a single interceptor for high-value targets. Shoot-assess-shoot sequences provide layered opportunity. And here is the escalation pivot. The SM-3 Block IIA has demonstrated capability against intermediate-range ballistic targets traveling at speeds exceeding those of Fateh-class missiles. In testing, intercept altitude and velocity envelopes exceeded initial program expectations, which means the engagement space expands. The defender pushes the intercept window farther out. Volume must now overcome precision in space. That is a far more difficult problem. So here is the strategic debate. If you were planning a missile barrage against an Aegis-equipped fleet, would you invest in more short-range ballistic missiles? Or pivot toward maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicles to complicate mid-course tracking? Analyze the trade-offs. Because once mid-course intercept becomes reliable, the advantage shifts quietly. Not publicly. Quietly. When Iran launches Fateh missiles in a show of force, the objective is psychological as much as tactical. Visibility. Deterrence signaling. Regional influence. But if those missiles are intercepted in space, invisible to most observers, the strategic narrative changes. The arc never completes. The spectacle dissolves before impact. Humiliation does not come from explosion. It comes from irrelevance. However, adversaries adapt. Iran, like other missile powers, studies countermeasures. Potential evolutions include immaneuverable re-entry vehicles to complicate terminal intercept, a reduced radar cross-section shaping, a decoy deployment in mid-course, increased salvo size to stress interceptor inventories, a development of hypersonic glide vehicles with depressed trajectories. Each introduces new complexity. But complexity increases cost and technical burden. Maneuvering warheads reduce payload mass and range. Decoys require reliable separation and thermal management. Hypersonic glide vehicles demand advanced materials capable of surviving sustained atmospheric heating. The cost curve rises. And layered U.S. defense adapts. Aegis ashore sites complement sea-based interceptors. THAAD batteries provide high-altitude terminal defense. Patriot systems handle lower-tier engagements. F-35 aircraft extend sensor coverage with distributed aperture systems capable of detecting ballistic launches. This is systems integration. No single interceptor guarantees dominance. The network does. Space-based sensors cue sea-based interceptors. Sea-based interceptors hand off to terminal systems if required. Command and control integrates across services and allies. When critics argue that interceptors can be saturated, they are not wrong in theory. Any finite magazine can be stressed. But saturation requires sustained volume under detection. Launch sites can be surveilled. Mobile launchers can be targeted preemptively if conflict escalates. Missile production capacity limits sustained tempo. Ballistic offense is not infinite. And interception in space buys something invaluable. Decision time. Destroying a missile in mid-course removes the urgency of terminal panic. The defender regains initiative, which resolves the earlier question of geometry. Who controls the arc? Not the launcher. The interceptor. Ballistic missiles were once symbols of inevitability. Launch detected. Impact expected. Damage absorbed. That assumption shaped decades of deterrence theory. The SM-3 Block IIA quietly dismantles that assumption. Not through spectacle. Through physics. When interception occurs outside the atmosphere, the ballistic arc loses its aura of certainty. A missile that never re-enters is not a threat, it is debris. And debris does not coerce. This does not mean missile defense makes war easy. It does not. No system is infinite. No sensor is perfect. No interceptor magazine is bottomless. But layered integration shifts the burden back to the attacker. To overwhelm mid-course interception, an adversary must increase volume, increase sophistication, or increase maneuver complexity. Each of those choices increases cost. Each introduces engineering friction. Each demands industrial depth. And here is the strategic legacy. The Fateh missile was designed to compress time and overwhelm defenses inside the atmosphere. The SM-3 Block IIA stretches time and relocates the fight to space. The battle moves upward. Higher altitude. Earlier intercept. Cleaner resolution. That relocation matters. Because once engagement happens in vacuum, the defender is no longer reacting to impact. The defender is managing trajectories. This is not theatrical dominance. It is architectural dominance. Aegis ships do not exist in isolation. They are nodes in a global ballistic missile defense grid, connected to satellites, allied navies, land-based interceptors, and air assets. The system learns. The intercept window expands. The geometry favors prediction. Iran will adapt. Others will adapt. Hypersonic glide vehicles, depressed trajectories, maneuverable payloads, the evolution will continue. But every adaptation forces trade-offs. Range versus payload. Maneuverability versus structural stress. Volume versus industrial cost. And the side that integrates sensors, interceptors, and doctrine more efficiently retains initiative. Missiles are visible power. Interception in space is invisible power. If strategic stability now depends on who controls the mid-course phase, the question is not whose missile launches louder. It is whose network calculates faster. If you trust engineering over spectacle, subscribe. This channel breaks down warfare through physics, geometry, and cost, not headlines. And consider this final question. In the next decade, will ballistic missiles remain the primary tool of regional coercion? Or will space-based intercept architectures quietly redefine deterrence? Analyze the trajectory. Because in modern conflict, dominance is rarely declared. It is calculated.